Welcome to everyone for joining us for another New Star Books virtual book launch. Thanks for joining us on this lovely sunny Sunday morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it may be where you are tuning in from. Today we have the pleasure of celebrating not one but two amazing books by the great George Bowering. First Soft Sipper from earlier this year, and the recently published Could Be, a collection of new poems. Before we get going into the fun stuff, just a few things to take care of. First of all, we would like to say that here at New Star Books, we are broadcasting from and have the solemn privilege of working on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. This land was never ceded, sold, or given up, and as we are all tuning in from far and wide today, we would like to take a moment to invite you all to pay your respects and acknowledge the First Nations and the custodians of the land upon which you are residing. If you would like to share that with us in the chat down the bottom, please feel free to. A couple of other housekeeping notes. We are recording this launch at the moment and it'll be available in the coming week. Make sure you are signed up for our email newsletter on our website, or you can follow us on our social media accounts at New Star Books to stay up to date. And we are making use of the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window there later on in the launch. If you would like to pop your questions in there, please feel free to. There is an anonymous feature if you'd like to use that. But we also thought we might change things up a little bit this time. And if you would like to step up to the mic, so to speak, to ask your question, when we get to that portion of the launch, you can use the raise hand function, which should also be at the bottom of your window, and we can invite you to turn on your microphone. If you decide to do that, we just ask that you be mindful that this is indeed being recorded and will be on the internet forever, as they say, and to just keep an eye out so that Zoom should send you a little notification to turn on your microphone, and you just need to click that and then we'll be able to hear you. Now onto the good part. I have the pleasure of introducing our wonderful host for this evening. Charlie Demers is a comedian, writer, and playwright. He's the author of the novels Property Values and the Prescription Errors, as well as the non-fiction titles The Horrors, Vancouver Special, and with George Bowering, The Dad Dialogues. He is a regular on CBC's The Debaters and is also the voice of Walter the Slug on the Emmy-winning Netflix cartoon Big Bugs. He's the editor of Robin's Egg Books, a humour imprint of Arsenal Pulp Press. A long-time political activist, he lives in Vancouver, East Vancouver rather, with his wife and daughter, and he also posts new writing weekly at charliedemers.substack.com. And I will hand it over to you, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and thank you all for joining us on this very temperate and completely normal June day. What a lovely temperature it is, and I think I'd like you all to acknowledge the great courtesy that George has shown by appearing today in a shirt. He let me know earlier this week that that is not his custom during this part of the year, that the men of the interior typically during this season would lose their shirts somewhere in their homes, and then around the time of Canadian Thanksgiving start to wonder where where in the homes the shirts had been put, where they had been sort of squirreled away. And so we are all not only lucky to be here with each other, not only lucky to be celebrating these two wonderful books, but also very lucky that George is not in the nude. So everyone is hopefully keeping warm, keeping hydrated, because it's very warm. I invite you all to have large conveyances of water wherever you are. Don't spill them onto your computers. Keep them at a safe distance, but do have water. If this is your first home book launch, welcome and congratulations. We're trying to recreate the best we can the feeling of a real live book launch. So if you could pour yourself a small glass of like an okay wine, not a good wine, not a bad wine, but something right down the middle, and we will very much be aiming for verisimilitude. We are here today to celebrate George Bowering and his work. George Bowering, of course, whom you know as our country's very first poet laureate, two-time winner of the Governor General's Award, Order of Canada, a member of the Order of Canada, a long-time academic in the English department at Simon Fraser University, author of more than 100 works of literary whatever. Like he's a multi-genre. Sorry, George, did you want to? I have asked for George to be muted throughout this event. I hope that that is also okay. That will, I think, make this all run more smoothly. Of course, George is also known to you as, after Pfizer and Moderna, the third most beloved prick in British Columbia. And we are so pleased today to be celebrating two of his books. As you all know, if you know George Bowering, you know that the man writes books at the same clip as the general public reads them. And so we cannot launch in time with his production schedule. So we are celebrating Could Be, a book of poems, and Soft Zipper, a book of short prose. We'll talk a little bit about what kind of book Soft Zipper is. As always with George, it's not easy to slot into the categories of a Heather's pick necessarily. We'll see just how deep into the t-shirt this little sweat stain can get going as we continue. But without further ado, I will now turn things over to the man of the hour and ask the beloved George Bowering to start us off with a reading from Could Be.
So I was looking for more further ado. Jeez. All right. Now, my eyes are not good today. Well, I should say my eye is not good today because I really am functioning with only one eye. And so if what I'm doing is not, this part I'm not going to read directly from the book. I'm going to read from slightly larger print on pieces of paper. But you can read from the book too if you've already got a copy. And if you haven't, well, there's time. Yeah, could be. Now, I don't think Could Be was not my original title. My original title was Barefoot Gringo, which everybody all over Canada said, that's brilliant. But then my editor and publisher said, you're not going to publish that damn book with my publishing house with that title. So I didn't use it. But I did sneak the phrase in elsewhere in the book. So I'm starting with the title poem. It's not a great poem, but it's, I think now, a really good title. It's a kind of a Samuel Beckett kind of title. Could be. Have I dreamed my life, or was it a true one? Have I chosen, or was I depicted? One moment in Athens, I felt as if I were in a dream, not dreaming, but in such a place. Was it Athens? Or a dream of Greece, and who was dreaming? Was I not the dreamer? I have often said a poem is a moment of waking up, and then I quit because I've never liked Plato. My life could be the title of a book, Consideration as if outside. No, that is impossible. Let's start over. The first thing I did, after being born, was look around and fall asleep, or so I'm told by my fellow dreamers. I thought, well, if I'm going to start off with the title of the book, let's make the second poem the cover of the book. It's called Bruegel's Idiots. And all of you who are in your heads now complacently saying, Bruegel, you're wrong. You'd think they'd learn a lesson from Icarus, or at least the part of him they could see if they'd only look. But no, one guy lets his sheep walk on stone all the way down to the water where there's nothing to graze. And I can't help but wonder what he's looking at up in the sky, while another guy sits on the slippery stone, leaning into the air far above the disturbed water. The guy in the dead center whacks his horse while plowing around a dead sheep, or maybe female Martian visitor probably fallen from above the sun. They all could have taken a tip from any father who said, pay attention, any odd and even peculiar poet, any such artist could see those woolly critters will be lamb burgers. Any Billy's going to tell you, look out, at least apply some sunscreen. The sea is also a labyrinth. The last part is a sly reference to William Carter Williams, who wrote a poem, wonderful poem called The Sea is Also a Garden, which became the title of a book of poems by a famous Canadian poet, etc. This book is made up of several kinds of poems, as George Stanley quickly noticed. And so there's various sections in the poem with titles to the sections. And this is from a later section of poems about people, continuing a thing I've been doing for years and years, prose sentence poems about various people. This one's about one of my very favorite poets, Bobby Louise Hawkins. It's called A Handful. I heard Roy Meeky and Bobby Louise Hawkins playing guitar and singing Hurtin' songs upstairs at Karen Tallman's house and thought, hey, I know all these tunes. There's nothing solid and forever in life, y'all, she said, and dragged some illustration across the copying machine, winking while she worked, watching the light disappear. Well, Bob was from New England, and Bobby was from West Texas. What the hell did you expect? A peaceful spring rain shower across the upper Middle West? We all remember hearing her voice saying, I owe you one. Some of us with broad smiles on our faces, some gobbling a handful of stay awake pills. First time I saw her, I thought, some powerful artist from a conjure land has created or called up a tall Mayan princess which belonged in a poem I couldn't read. She was older than me and younger than my mother, and reminded me that part of my blood got here from some mountains in the Ozarks, secret home of awful wisdom. She came all the way here to help us lose the idea that beautiful women were the artist's wife, learn to understand their precious hands that were sometimes fists. I'll read you once a wonderful prose poem about finally whacking an unpleasant husband over the head with a 2x4 when he was asleep. Subject for poetry. This poem is called Basura, which is the Spanish word for garbage. I'm so happy just to be with hers, a phrase been going around in my head, where the mortality has set up shop. Probably, I don't know, a normal eventuality. But when she's far away from me, I'm awfully blue. The way blue used to mean awfully blue, like a roadside someone threw basura into, a ditch used up stuff ends down in, used up being the way old writers are made to feel. It could happen to you, just as sure as the boat to Hades does not slow down to let you look at those daffodils, saying, is that too much to ask? You had your chance to admire the posies. I told you, you walked too fast, and now she has got to slow down just to be with you. If I could only play my cousin Russell's saxophone, I could play all the long, slow pieces, waiting for the bass player to give me a lift up, waiting for her to end the young brass childhood of the blues. Get a couple more of these before Charlie gets to take over again. Is that all right? Gilbert Sorrentino. Whenever people ask me who my favorite American living writer was up until a couple of years ago, I said Gilbert Sorrentino. Reading Gilbert Sorrentino on Maureen Niedecker, I whispered, it's nice being here. Being old in a chair, I decided this moment not to describe could be called what we've been waiting for all this time. One keeps changing one's mind about poems one has never ceased admiring, almost you could say loving, save that the remark is reserved for people who never read anything serious. People sometimes say, "Oh, I love your book." And when I have the nerve, I'll say, "That's not what it was written for." Lund. I once had a wonderful sexual weekend in Lund, Sweden, but that's not what this is about. This is about Lund, BC, where they don't have any sex from what I've heard. Lund. You know, I think us old guys have it harder with this summer heat, or as a matter of fact, with just about everything. But look, this week I finally got to see Lund, British Columbia. And it's funny, you get 100 miles from Lund and nobody knows anything about it. So the end of Highway 101 is pretty much like the end of my life. But there's this. In Lund, someone amended the sign proclaiming the end of Highway 101 so that now it reads the beginning. And this is from a section of very short, I know, I heard the applause as soon as I said that word, very short poems, but with lots of stuff packed in that shortness. In a big burnished wood university elevator, a girl new from the country held in one hand an orange for me to cut open 60 years later. Now, I have to read the second one from the book because I don't have an otherwise copy of it. In a hillside above my dry town, I dug a hole out of which I lifted a knife, a baseball, and finally this poem. People are always saying, I wish you'd read that again so I would get it, but I'm not, so there. She dresses for success, but looks at me and holds a gold tooth to the light. This, she says, my grandfather gave to me if I would sit on his knee again. And I'm finishing this section off with a sentence poem from my brother, a couple of years ago. Well, actually, in the winter of 1617, my mother died on the night that the Americans got a new president. Somebody said that was her putting in her vote. And then my sister died a couple weeks later, and then a couple months later, my brother died. And he was my favorite relative in lots of ways. Mr. Stay. Usually, I thought of him as a better version of me, left-handed, like a mirror. He had a singular way of walking, which was just like Uncle Jerry's singular way of walking. When I first knew him, he stood in his crib across my bedroom, plaster of Paris around his head. I showed him and Jim how to play baseball till they were better at it than their teacher. I was hungry to circle the world and could not understand Mr. Stay at Home. But I always felt as if I were home at his place, my ghosts staying at the door. His secret life was lumber. My secret life was tree fruits. We drank beer together after work. Our mother said, I gave you the same 4 letters for your first names. Learn to spell. We stood in the valley where they turned brown to green, and neither complained. There is a left-handed soul walking around the South Okanagan, and I think I know who he is. Poems.
Thank you, George. Those were poems from Could Be, which was the elder sibling of the two books being launched today. The second is a book of short prose pieces that is maybe deceptively simple, judging by some reviews, and I mean, deceptively simple. You could come up with a worse two-word description of George Bowering. I will right now read a bit of, I think, very helpfully contextualizing from the introduction to this book by Lisa Robertson. So I'll read a very brief passage from the introduction by Lisa, and then George will read us some selections from Soft Zipper. So this is from Lisa Robertson. Soft Zipper, a fragmented anti-memoir which organizes a lifetime of vignettes and recollections around a resolutely objective rather than subjective point of view, borrows a structure and subtitles, objects, food, rooms, from American modernist Gertrude Stein's 1914 volume, Tender Buttons. What Stein discovered in writing her prose poems, also while on holiday, but in Spain, was that space is a synthetic perception. We compose it retrospectively, with glimpses, borrowings, visual and musical rhymes and puns, and the staccato movement of our attention. In Tender Buttons, the domestic detritus assembled by early cubists in their still life collages finds its way across into her prose poems and becomes there a plastic field of syntactic experiment, the, quote, rhythm of the visible world, end quote, as she later explained. Where Stein's ear is playfully abstract, or at least abstracting, George's sound sense is vernacular, keyed to the plain pleasures of familiar speech. William Carlos Williams, rather than Eric Satie, would be a sonic predecessor. Prose is a domestic production here. His spaces, too, are often fabricated and fleshed out in accordance with the homely pleasure of touch. The feel of his father's homemade felt skullcap in his hands is the first haptic foray. And soon after, those same hands, in sweet homage to Stein, are plunged into a big glass bowl of buttons at his grandmother's house. The writer's hands remain present throughout this book, holding combs, baseballs, the remote control, reminding us also that this prose is made, and by hand too, at a table. It is a writing table, a long table, a deal table, an outdoor table, a kitchen table where cribbage or canasta is played, his old Professor Warren Tallman's mahogany table, and it is a rhythmic point of return. Hands do something at a table repeatedly, usually with others. How did he make it work? George asks of his father and his little skullcap. It is one of the questions we might bring as readers into his book. And now, George Bowering will read from Soft Zipper.
Ah, that was good. She is so good, isn't she? Whoa. I'm so proud to have her as the introducer of this. I was thinking of reading the skullcap one, but George Stanley was talking about the second one in the book, which is called the second object, which is, despite the fact that this is not an American book, the gun. When I was in grade 3, I felt unarmed. All the boys had guns, or wished they had guns. I wish that I had a gun. The most popular game for boys was guns. Some of the time we played swords, so we all had skin knuckles that made our mothers look up at the ceiling. A few years later, after my family moved into town, I had a famous sword that had been through innumerable battles. It had serious dents, but a lot of enemy swordsmen had lost their wooden blades in unfortunate challenges. But back when I was in grade 3, my parents somehow got wind of the fact that I pined for a gun. As far as I knew, the only way a boy could get a gun was in the form of a Christmas or birthday present. In the weeks previous to my 8th birthday, I must have been ramping up the hints, walking around the house or outside, maneuvering between apple trees, pointing at invisible adversaries with a crooked twig, and making that boy's expulsive mouth sound that does not in the least resemble the report of a real revolver or automatic. On the first day of December, my birthday, in case you wanted to know, arrived. And yes, Georgie got his gun. I immediately performed my fictional thanks. Guns were supposed to be constructed of some metal and came, if they were revolvers, in a belted holster. And if they were automatics, they should have looked like the kind of steel that kidnappers and Nazis were afraid of. My gun was made of rather softish wood, a kind of squarish thing. When I pulled the trigger, you could not squeeze that item that was probably kept taut by a rubber band. It said, click. Well, I could read most of that. One more objects one, rocks. The largest object I've ever touched with my hand is our planet, or with my feet, or my imagination, or the north shore of Lake Erie, shortly before you run out of Canada. There is a grassy park that slopes down to the calm water. Below a tall, deciduous tree, there is a bench. I'm having a little trouble reading this because my macular degeneration is, I'm going to see if I can read it with one eye. Below a tall, deciduous tree, there is a bench commemorating the short life of my stepdaughter, Bronwyn. To the right of the bench is a plaque with a poem for her, and beneath it are some ashes becoming part of the largest object we have known. Also, around the plaque are smaller objects, many rocks of various colors and shapes. Each of these rocks used to be somewhere else on the planet. There are rocks from Vancouver Island, Tierra del Fuego, Cuba, Alaska, and India. There is a piece of volcano from Hawaii, a chunk of the Great Pyramid of Giza, and another from that other pyramid, the Temple of the Sun in Teotihuacan. The Great Wall of China is represented, as is the Acropolis. I think that Bronwyn's mother, Jean, wished that Bronwyn could have gone and visited these sites, so she brought small bits of them to the park where she and her friends liked to hang out. In her luggage, Jean carried pieces of Florida, Spain, Rome, Curacao, and the Rocky Mountains. Some years ago, Jean and I stayed in a house in the beach at the farthest north reach of the Yucatan Peninsula, as close as you could get on foot to the site where the largest object ever to strike our planet crashed. Gathering special rocks from around the globe to place beside Bronwyn's bench is Jean's way of doing the opposite. Oh. Where am I? I'm going to try reading some more, and if I can't, I'll just quit and let's go into the next thing. It's just that my eye is getting really funny. Ballpark Franks. That should cheer up anybody. And by that, I don't mean Frank O'Hara or if you travel the world in search of baseball games, you're not going to be able to avoid ballpark food. This is in the section called food, naturally. People talk about ballpark food whenever their conversation turns to the subject of ballparks. There are three main topics in these conversations. One, the terrible high prices of the hot dogs and beer and so on. Two, the poor quality of the food as compared to the same stuff you could have at home. And three, the outrageous specialty items for sale at particular stadiums. Sometimes when I'm in ballpark world, I say stadia, which is frowned upon. Why is there a big C in front of me? Oh well. Just for example, I will not name the park in which you can get a hamburger containing 4 patties of some meat, along with 4 slices of cheese, plus onions, tomatoes, lettuce, mustard, ketchup, mayo, chilies, and rather than a simple hamburger bun, a halved, giant-size Krispy Kreme donut. Don't worry, I am not going to list all the atrocious culinary insults to be found, not even the turkey leg that Jean bought at a Lakeland Flying Tigers game. It was as big as her head. And the universal rule applies inside or outside a ballpark. Never eat anything bigger than your head. Sometimes the fare at the stadium is what you might expect given the geography. Hence, you will get clams and sushi in Seattle. But what explains the other notable option there? I'm talking about crickets. But at heart, baseball food comprises hot dogs, popcorn, and peanuts. Once, during a persistent drizzle, I saw a baseball game played at a hillside park just outside Basel. As you might expect, the quality of the baseball played was nothing to text home about, but this was Switzerland. I had the best ballpark hot dog ever. But let's go from Switzerland to its opposite. They have always loved baseball in Saskatchewan, but it's the prairies, eh? We once went to a playoff game in Moose Jaw. The ballpark food came on a paper plate. It consisted of roast turkey, mashed potatoes with gravy, and mixed veg. And I forgot to mention that those scraped bits of carrot inside jelly, aspic something or other, right? Okay, I was going to read 2 more, but I'm having so much trouble with my eyes. And you guys would rather listen to yourselves and Charlie than me for a little while. So take it away.
Charlie could do one.
Okay. I and sorry for flashing that big C at you, George. It was not your grade for the reading. I was just I had to change tops. Watching the sweat stain progress was not something I could quite handle. For the this Zoom universe that we're living in. Thank you. Yes, Rolf. If we could, I should have asked for air conditioning to have been installed at my home before today's launch. George, do you want to talk with each other for a few minutes, and then we'll open things up to one thing that I was thinking of as you were reading, particularly from Soft Zipper, which I'm only now, of course, tender buttons.
You got it. You got it.
Okay. I see. It didn't take. It only took a minute, but I did. I did get there. So it's so tactile, right? And this year has been so virtual. Like this is like everyone is removed from physical life with each other, but their own physical lives, and everything has been in this kind of
on screen.
yeah. So was that when were you writing this? And
Well, it's curious. It happens that it should have mentioned before. I started writing it in Mexico, just as Gertrude Stein started writing hers in Spain, which I thought, I didn't even think of that coincidence at the time. It was just the job, but I finished writing it back here in Vancouver. It must have been written in, what would be, Gene, probably 2019, something like that, something in that area. We would go to La Manzanilla in January or February or both, or sometimes December, and jump into our apartment and look out at the ocean, which I never went in. You know why? Because it was full of things that sting you.
Full of things that sting you?
Things that sting you, yeah. Stingrays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as Melissa has helpfully pointed out, anyone who has a question can also can either write it in the chat, or we're also going to be doing something where we go to the attendees and you can raise your hand. And the way that you do that is by I think it's in the Q&A tab. Is that correct, Melissa?
Just unmute myself.
Sorry?
There we go. At the bottom of the screen there's a little button next to the Q&A button that says raise hand. I'll be able to see anyone who has a hand up, and I'll invite you to turn your microphone on if you'd like.
Yeah, you'll be able to ask your questions viva voce. You'll be able to ask your own questions. You won't have to rely on me interpreting your question, maybe giving the wrong word emphasis or anything like that. So and how about, what about Could Be? When was that being written?
Could Be was, it's over a period of a decade, I guess.
Okay.
Until about less than a year ago.
And is that typical that a piece of prose would tend to be written all of a piece?
Well, not necessarily. With my novels, always took me, for some reason, 7 years. It would always take me 7 years to write a novel. Almost all my novels took each of them took 7 years to write. Whereas actually the kind of writing that's in soft zipper is my favorite kind of writing. And I've done it often. A sequence made out of short globs, right? This one, each one is about a page and a half long. In this one, I don't know how many words that turns out to be. And I've done a lot of books in that way. I've done a baseball book that way.
Yeah.
And so forth. It's I love that kind of writing, because you can get it. You get yourself a notebook and say, okay, I'm going to write 3 pages in this notebook and then I'm done for the day, and I can do whatever I want to do. Like read Charlie's books and stuff like that.
I've always really loved reading that kind of writing. I like doing that kind of writing as well, but I've always loved reading that kind of writing, and those sort of and then when the internet came along, it felt like there would be more space for this kind of interstitial that not be kind of industrial sized prose, that everything has to be this book length arc for either a book length nonfiction or book length novel. And yet it's
we're in Toronto, man.
Yeah, not everybody's as cool as New Star in the sense of being open to this kind of why do you think that is?
I used to, for a little while, I did that business about getting published with Penguin Books and all that stuff in Ontario and so on and so forth. And I realized I'm not in the world that I feel right in. It's not the right world, right? So and almost all my books are published in Vancouver now, and because we've always said, hey, you guys figure out how to do this. Like, we're not going to tell you how to do this. You guys are the writer. You guys figure it out. And we've been doing that for, ever since I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
It's odd.
How
that's what Roy Kyoka did. He kept finding out a different way of writing a book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my heroes.
Now, when you're reading these poems that are you refer to sort of prose sentences in these poems, and then when you have these fragmentary pieces of of prose, they can feel poetic, or some people might even describe them as prose poetry. Do you, as someone who works in these different genres, do you feel that there's a hard point of departure between when you're writing prose and when you're writing poetry, or do you find out as you're working on a piece which one it is?
Yeah, that's a welcome question. That in 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 both of them, both of them, my main aesthetic is do a lot of research and then try not to do what you're doing, not to know what you're doing. Right.
Right.
So when I'm writing those short prose piece books, like the one about baseball or the one about places in the world and so on and so forth, I turn on my poet button. I do write as if I was writing a poem, but I don't. But it looks on the page exactly like prose. Like I don't have line ends, right? I just have sentence ends. On the other hand, there's those sentence poems that I talked about. I've been doing them for they appear in about my last, I don't know, 10 poetry books, and they're things I write to commemorate something, like the person's death, for instance. It's one of the most obvious ones, or the person, or for some other reason, right? The Bobby Louise Hawkins one was actually written for a collection of an American book about her. So it was okay, I can do that's how I can. When they said, "Can you give us something on Bobby Louise Hawkins?" I could say, "Well, that's what I do. Sometimes I write prose." So usually, what they are is 2-line paragraphs.
Mm.
And so there is a lot of crossover, and I don't know what the difference between poetry and prose is, but sometimes, like obviously my history books there's not much poetry in them, but they are careful with language. The primary thing is the language on the page in front of your face, right? So,
yeah. Because the history books aren't, I mean, I wouldn't think like even a title like Stone Country, that's not what you call a book of history about Canada that's just supposed to be a compendium of facts about, here you're supposed to get to know this country. I mean, Burning Water, which is fiction about Captain Vancouver, and Stone Country, which is putatively a nonfiction book of history about Canada. Like those are two titles that to me are in the same mode. They cue me for some bits of the same kind of reading, even though they are different kinds of books.
Yeah, you just reminded me, like one of the nicest things that V.P. Nichols said to me just shortly before he died is, he wrote it down somewhere. I think it was the last thing he ever wrote. He said that Bowering's, that was a blurb for something. He said that I had it in my head a second ago.
Poetry reads like prose and prose reads like.
Well, it's not poetry and prose. It was something like, anyway, it was the suggestion that it was that, he writes essays as if they were literature, right? And literature as if it was an essay.
Mm-hmm.
Or I know what, short fiction as if it was, it was fiction and essays, right? He said that he writes an essay as if it were fiction, and fiction as if it were an essay. Yeah, that's right.
I love that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I'm so glad.
Jean had mentioned that there was a recent review of Soft Zipper, which was a very positive review about the book. The reviewer liked it, and also did not kind of register the conversation between the book and Tender Buttons, or it was not part of. Just enjoyed the book kind of in a way divorced from.
He said, why did the person that introduced this bring up Gertrude Stein?
Yeah. So what is that? How does something like that land with you? I mean, is something like that a relief that it means that people don't have to do? There are no prerequisites to the book, or is it frustrating because someone has missed this major dimension of the work? I mean, or does it mean that people can check in on the book in various different ways?
Well, Rolf, my publisher, said he was happy for that review because it showed that even if somebody was not some smart aleck that knows all this stuff about Gertrude Stein, could still like the book, right? So you don't have to have just some kind of the professor reading it, right? And I've always had this thing going in my head. Like I always put lots of hidden, difficult things inside writing. Not that this was, and then I'm really glad when somebody gets it. Like I remember somebody got like one of the most important things ever in my book about the Caprice was an English woman writing a review in an American journal got what I was doing with French poetry at the very end of the book, and nobody else got it, right? I like it. But then on the other hand, I think, oh, Jesus, no. If they get everything, that means I'm not doing it enough. So I'm happy when they find these things. And on the other hand, I'm disappointed, right? Because that was too easy. But on the other hand, that's what this book was written for. It was like, I give a shout out to Steve McCaffrey, who did a translation of Tender Buttons, right? And it was published in 2 volumes, one Stein, one volume, one Steve McCaffrey. This time I thought of it at first as a translation, but I thought, no, it's not a translation. It's Gertrude Stein made easy. It's like people taking passages, Bible stories from the Bible and making it easier to understand.
Yeah. Well, let's go to the participants. That we do have some people in the audience who, as Melissa said, if you want to ask a question, you can actually ask it yourself by. Okay, we have a hand up, and it is Judith. Hello, Judith, and I will unclick your. Or is it Melissa that does that?
Hi, can you hear me? That was kind of a mistake.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi.
George, I don't even have an intelligent question for you. I hit the button by mistake, but here I am. And so I'm kind of disembodied here. You can hear my voice, but you can't see me. Is that what's happening?
Yeah. Twice. Yeah, for everybody that doesn't know, Judith is the person who runs this system for our book club.
Oh,
She knows what she's doing.
running. I don't know if that's the right word. Yeah, I want to, because I haven't seen these 2 books yet, which I will, but I would like you to say a little bit more about the language in Soft Zipper.
It's very plain, I think, except
yeah, but how that correlates or mirrors or refutes Gertrude Stein and the way to use language, kind of the opposite.
I think it's the opposite. Actually, there are 2 sections that are unusual, and one is that there's one section on food written by Thea Bowering, my daughter. And then there's one section I wrote in Steinese. I had written in Steinese before. So I just wanted to, just for fun, I wrote one passage, I can't even remember which one it is now, in imitation of Gertrude Stein, which everybody was doing for a while. Well, I was doing it maybe earlier than most people. But Gertrude Stein is a person who, if you become a big fan and do a lot of reading, you find yourself, for some reason or another, imitating. So in terms of the language on this, I had what I wanted to do, or to test out, or to display, was the ability to write this book without imitating her, to using language that is unlike hers. And I think that happened, but it's still, it's an homage and an answer and something else, but it's not an imitation.
So can I just ask, in the writing of it, you said before you do a lot of research and then you try not to know what you're doing.
Yeah,
So of course you're really, really familiar with Stein,
yeah.
but when you were trying not to write like Stein, were you conscious? Were you carrying with it certain ideas of what you should not,
No, not really.
ways you should?
I straightened it up by the title was an answer to Stein, and as Elisa pointed out, the 3 sections are named after the 3 sections of her book, and they have quotations right in them. So I'm not misdirecting, but I'm directing in a direction away from Gertrude Stein, but it's away from Gertrude Stein in the sense that a leaf is away from a root. Is that too fancy?
No, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and so the root is there, but the root isn't what the root is not. I used to think that that when we looked up for the roots of our family or something like that, or the roots of the language, I used to think it meant what it used to be, but it's not. It's like in a plant. The root is what's still there, but where we are is not there. We're out in the plain world. So I don't know if that's too.
Okay, well, I look forward to reading it with some of those thoughts in mind.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I hope you.
And if people do want to pre-read Tender Buttons, if you don't know the book, it's very, I mean, it's deceptively modest pre-reading because it's the densest thin book that you're going to find. But you can this summer together you can tackle Tender Buttons and Soft Zipper. And then, in that time, George will have written 3 more books and you'll be ready for Christmas. George, do you have any, are there any final words that you have for your public?
Who, me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Get lots of stuff to drink, like
Yes.
mainly water.
Hydrate. And
so how many people out there are naked from the waist down?
yeah, you can answer that question in the chat if you want, and I would encourage you not to. But Pinboy, I thought, was the last George Bowering book I would ever hear a reading from and need to get into a cold shower. But that's where I'm headed as soon as we're done this launch. Right back into a very cold shower.
I already had one.
And so thank you, everyone, for joining us. Melissa, where could and should people buy Could Be and Soft Zipper by George Bowering?
At an indie.
Yes, you can find all of these books at your regular online Amazons, Indigos, but we really want to encourage everyone to check out their local independent booksellers. We have some blog posts on our website that list where the book is available, but walk into your local independent, tell them to get it in. They're really the backbone of the publishing industry lately, especially these days more than ever. So we'd really love to see you guys getting in there, buying books and, supporting your local indies. So definitely check them out there. On top of all of that, I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us today. Hopefully we're all able to stay inside and stay as cool as possible. Thank you to Charlie and of course to George for joining us live today. Yeah, keep an eye out for the recording of this launch and keep in touch with us, and we'll see you all at the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Adios.